and begin by welcoming everybody. Thank you so much for logging on to join us this beautiful morning for a real estate update with Bill Weidacher. So you can go ahead. There's just a few housekeeping notes we want to mention. For this online workshop, everyone's on mute, but we welcome your questions. Please enter them at the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The workshop is being recorded, so you can look for a link in your email a few days following the presentation. We welcome suggestions on how to improve, or if you have a topic in mind that you'd love to learn more about, we would love to put together a presentation for you. So please let us know. I just want to share a little bit of information about the Riverwoods group. We are the largest independent group of not-for-profit continuing care retirement communities in northern New England. We have 3 campuses, our flagship campus in three communities rather, our flagship campus in Exeter, Birch Hill affiliated with the group in 2016, and our newest community, Riverwoods Durham, opened in 2019. Beyond being a beautiful community, which you just saw pictured, continuing care retirement communities, or CCRCs, are also known as, you may have heard them called a life plan or a long-term care insurance product. So that's what they are, and our contracts are regulated by the state. Our financial performance is reported to the state of New Hampshire annually as well. You are considered prepaying and insuring for your potential assisted living and nursing care needs.
I don't know why it does
Because
that.
you're prepaying and insuring for your future needs, a portion of the entrance fee and the monthly service fee are tax deductible. But it's also a lifestyle choice. We welcome adults 62 or better who are still living independently, who want more time to do the things that they love and free themselves from the burden of home maintenance and chores. This lifestyle also includes amenities like transportation, housekeeping, meals, a packed calendar of events, lectures, activities, trips, fitness classes. And it's also a choice of optimism in which you're staying in control of your life. And what I mean by that is you're making the choice about where your future healthcare needs will be provided. A CCRC answers the questions about where your care will be provided, who is going to provide that care, and how much that care is going to cost. You're not leaving anything to chance, and you're not burdening your family with making those decisions for you in a crisis. If you'd like more information, there's a slide at the end of this presentation if you wanted to reach out for a packet or to schedule a tour. But for today, we're here to get a spring real estate update with Bill Weidacher from Keller Willams. He's a broker with Fine Homes and Keller Willams Metropolitan. He has been a full-time realtor for more than 30 years and served on the Greater Manchester National Board of Realtors as their past president, and just about every position at the local and committee level. So it's safe to say he knows what he's talking about. So welcome, Bill. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Kim. It is also safe to say there was a time when I didn't know what I was talking about, and that is when I started in the business back in 1983. So this is now I'm entering into my 39th year of being in the real estate business. And so I started when I was 21. I've completed 38 years. I'm 59 years old, so you don't have to do any of the math here today. And we're going to talk a little bit about a few things this morning. And one of them is what a realtor is and what representation might mean for you as you consider the possible move. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of the market and the conditions that we are currently in. The idea of what is a buyer's market, what is a seller's market, and what are the conditions that separate the two. Home buying and selling, conceptually, what does that look like? And then we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A today. And so I think that's where we might have a real vibrant part of the discussion. Normally, in a PowerPoint presentation in a live format, there's this opportunity for dialogue back and forth. We don't have that opportunity, so I'm going to go through the slides, not super fast, but fast enough, because I think our attention spans, one of the things I've learned about going through online presentations is our attention can start to drift after a bit. So we're going to go through this, and then we can add more detail and some more meat on the bone, if you will, as we get into the Q&A. So realtors and representation. Well, I'm a member of the Realtor organization. There's 1,400,000 of us in the country. Matter of fact, there was an article in yesterday's Wall Street Journal that there are more realtors in the country currently than there are single family homes for sale. There's 1 million and change houses for sale in the market in the United States, and there's 1.4 million realtors. We're going to talk a little bit about the fact that you can be represented as a client, and the realtor would be your agent, and then disclosure is required by state law. So realtors are required to give disclosure as to who they represent. So if they represent somebody other than you, they're required to disclose that, which is very good. So here's what a lot of us might be considering. What's going on with prices? Well, single family home prices are at a historic high. We've never seen them higher. I'll share some of that data with you as we get further into it. The median price of homes through 2020 was $335,000. And it is the 9th consecutive year of price increases. And we are 66% higher than the median price in 2011, which was just a little over $200,000. And of course, interest rates, for those of you following, interest rates are still low. And this is a unique market. It's one unlike I've seen. Usually we've seen it favor strongly one or the other. And while this is a pretty heavy seller's market, buyers are still finding opportunity out there because interest rates are so low. As a matter of fact, I think the interest rates being as low as they are have contributed in large measure to the price increases that many of us homeowners have seen. This gives you an idea what the unit numbers looked like by county. And so I look at typically the numbers I spend a lot of time looking at are Hillsborough, Rockingham, and Merrimack County. And the reason I do is because they're sort of the populated counties in southern New Hampshire, and the markets that I do a lot of business in. And you can see last year, there was about 18,500 properties sold in the state. And that was an increase over the previous year in spite of the fact that inventory, new listings, was down a little bit. Median prices, $335,000. And you'll notice that was an 11.7, call it a 12% increase. Here's the interesting thing about this market is we're going to show you through some perspective what took place in 3 phases. And you'll notice I go back to 1998, and I call this part 1, which was this unsustainable boom in the marketplace. So just go back to the beginning of what I'm going to call the dot-com increase in the market, followed by dot-com bursts, and then also an economic downturn from the financial crisis. But you'll notice from 1998, we saw a 7.5% increase, a 15% increase, a 14% increase, 15, 11, 11, 6. So those numbers, when you look at that historically, you know 112% increase is not sustainable in the market. So we saw a peak of $270,000 in 2005 in our median sales price. And I want you to keep that as a note to yourself. That was the peak prior to the new peak, 2005. Now, here was the big slide where we saw a 25% decrease in prices. So you'll notice in 2006, the price slips to 265, 2007, 260, And then we are in full scale decline, 10% decrease in 2008. This is really the what I'm going to call the economic crisis, the housing crisis, 235, 10% decrease, another 10% decrease to 212, all the way to 2011, where we're at 201,700. Remember 2005 and $270,000, 25% decrease, followed by a very minuscule increase in 2012 of 202,000, 0.1%, 1/10 of 1% increase. And then here we go as we start to see the prices increase. Now, 2013, here's what I'm going to share with you. It was an 8.9% increase. In part, what happens when there is a burst in a housing market, what I've seen before, is the declines usually go a little bit below bottom. Meaning that 8.9% increase was where the market started to realize things are not as bad as $202,000. So you'll see the increase to 220. Of course, then 227.5 and 14. You'll see where I'm going with this, but I want you to look at 2017. $266,000 was our median price. Not 270 yet from 2005. So 12 years, not until 2018 do we see the market recover back over 270 to 283,000. And of course, you can see that since 2012, there's been a 66% increase in prices. And that is the recovery. And really, where are we now? We are in a housing shortage. And it's really all about inventory. So this is a very opportunistic market for those considering selling. And what do I mean by opportunistic? Well, I'll show you some data that the New Hampshire Association of Realtors pulls together on a monthly basis. And these are the things I go over with my clients when we're trying to figure out strategy in terms of pricing and equity positions and things of that sort. And it really is all about inventory. It's nothing simpler than supply and demand. 7 or 8 years ago, inventory had been high, and all that's gone now. It's now the lowest in our recorded history. Decreasing inventory, supply and demand also going up. We know what that's done to prices. It's increased the prices. How low is our inventory? We've had a shortage even before the pandemic. And then about just a year ago, we go into 1 year ago, right about now, is when we went into this sort of lockdown early on, which resulted in a loss of jobs, a severe amount of anxiety about either buying or selling. And the market sort of froze for about a 4 to 6 week period of time, and then took off. With uncertainty and inclination to stay put happened. And then of course the inventory shortage became a crisis. And how low is inventory? Well, this gives you an idea. This graph here, what I'm going to call the block chart or bar chart, the February, the yellow blocks represent the fact that in 2019, there was just under 4,000 houses on the market. A year ago, there were 3,200. So we were in an inventory crunch even then. And this is these are numbers from February, everybody. And then this February, 1,062. So 2/3 of the inventory is gone from where we were a year ago, meaning we're working on 1/3 of the inventory. Now, if you look at the longer graph at the bottom of this chart here, you'll notice we've gone from a high of about 15,000 houses on the market in and around 2010 to 1,000 in 2021. Big difference. So a buyer's market, we know this. The inventory is high, like I just talked about in 2010. Buyers have more leverage. They've got greater selection. And sellers typically in a buyer's market are willing to offer incentives. What do I mean by incentives? Well, they might be willing to pay closing costs. They might be willing to take less than what they're asking. There's a whole host of things. They might be willing to leave furniture and equipment and things of that nature to entice a buyer to buy. That's typically what we see in a buyer's market. In a seller's market, where inventory is low, you have the leverage. There's multiple offers happening. There's cash offers. There's buyers are likely to offer over asking price. And if you've talked to any of your friends or family or anybody in the industry that I'm in, you'll hear these stories of multiple offers and buyers being willing to pay much more than asking price. And that's as a result of there's just no inventory out there. And you'll see in a minute what that looks like. A balanced market, for those that say, where do you ever get to balance? And that's about 6 to 7 months of supply. That means it's sort of fair towards both parties. Neither buyer nor seller have the leverage. Well, we have under a month's supply in this state. And yesterday's Wall Street Journal article said nationwide we have a 2-month supply of inventory. It's the lowest that's ever been on record. And I think that's good news for people considering selling, but also it's good news for home builders out there, because I also know that nature abhors a vacuum. And when we have this kind of low inventory, it means that there's opportunity out there for builders to continue building and take risks that they might not have normally been willing to take. Here's the month's supply chart. And you'll notice that we had over 16 months of supply in 2009, 2010, which meant call it a year and a half. What does month's supply mean? It means this, that if nothing else comes on the market, based on the current demand, 7/10 of a month from now, all the inventory will be gone for single families in the state of New Hampshire. 3 weeks. If nothing else were to come on the market in 3 weeks, it would all be gone. 2 years ago, it was under 3 months supply. Now it's under 1 month. And you'll notice the blue blocks are condominiums, and they really kind of mirror what's going on in single families also. There's not really much difference there. It's under a month's supply also. Last year, the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors said, he was talking about 2019. He said at the end of 2019, it looked like 2020 could be a breakout year based on the fundamentals. And he said this in April of last year. You have to understand the facts. The housing market was exceptionally strong. We hit a pause button. It will recover. He could not have been more right about the housing market. It recovered and then some. It really took off starting in about May of last year here in New Hampshire, and really did not look back. We have experienced traffic levels all through the year, including the holidays, including January and February, that likely we would have seen in what I would call a typical spring market. The market has certainly recovered. We've modified our business practices to make sure that everybody involved is safe. And we do know this, people still need to buy and sell. And these things still take place in this market. And sales declined briefly, but then came back very strong. And to the point where 18,449 was the most in sales than any year in New Hampshire history. We had a 5% increase in units over 2020. So for buyers, we say this, you got to pick your spots. Prices are increasing, but there's still opportunities out there. And there are low interest rates. And we know that both homes and lower interest rates have not been easy to find lately. And what I mean by that is interest rates. There's been some pressure on rates, yet when I think about pressure on rates, people were refinancing a month and a half ago at 2.5%. And so you can imagine an increase in rates to 3 or 3.25 or 3.5. Well, for some of us who've been in the home ownership game for years, think of that and go, oh my God, if they only knew what it was like. When I first started in the business, the prime lending rate was 21%, and VA and FHA mortgages were 16%. And I remember the spring of 1983, people were knocking the doors down to get low interest New Hampshire housing finance money at 13 5/8. So interest rates are still pretty low, and there's still opportunity out there for buyers. For sellers, we're at historic highs for pricing and historic lows for inventory. I talked about the fact that there's multiple offers. You have the leverage. When's the best time to sell? Well, if everything else is equal and your timing is flexible, now's the time. So getting ready, if that's in fact something that's on your radar screen, it comes down to choosing a realtor, determining what your value of your home is. And here's the one really important piece of advice I can give you in an expanding market is if you get a price on your home today and you're 6 months away from selling your home, make sure you get a real good update when your time is coming close to putting it on the market, because in this expanding market, it could very well have gone up 5, 6, 7, 8 percentage points, and that's significant money. And so it's really important to stay on top of the market with the realtor you decide to hire. There's an inspection of the physical plant, and that's many of us living in our home over time, we tend to look past some of the things that might need to be ready or readied when getting your home on the market. I use this piece of advice with my clients is people judge what they cannot see by what they can see. And so oftentimes they're looking at some things that might need repair and thinking, well, if this needs repairing, what else does? So there are some real minor cosmetic things that can really help you. And then of course that's preparation. There are those that call it staging, but it's really the preparation of the property. And as promised, Kim, I was going to leave plenty of time for questions here today. So I'm going to escape out of this and go back to, there we are.
Great,
So
thanks, Bill. Those statistics on inventory and interest rates are just incredible. It's, I'm kind of failing to see where the pause button was, honestly.
Well, because we're good on time, let me show you, I'm going to show you something else that I think is quite telling. And I think will be informative for the folks on here. So let me just.
If you have a question, there's a Q&A function right at the bottom of your screen. You can go ahead and type your question in there for Bill. And wonderful. While you're pulling that up, I'll go ahead and mention our next event. It's called Medicare Mysteries Solved, and it's going to be presented by Michelle Megarian. If you have any questions about the ever-changing landscape of Medicare, join us on April 14th. You can register on any of our websites to get your Zoom link for that event. And I'll hand it back to you, Bill.
Great. Kim, can you see this chart with the United States map here?
Yes.
Okay. So this is provided to us by our third-party vendor called Showing Time, and they're the largest showing assistant software program that the majority of realtors in the country use. And so when showings are set up, they use this to coordinate it all. It's a platform that realtors can use with their clients to set up showings. So the light blue line here is 2019. The dark blue line, and I'm going to give you a little more perspective. The dark blue line is 2020, and then the orange line is today. Now, this is national. And you'll
now I see the pause button.
Now you look at that drop in showings. That's buyer activity dropped in March. You'll notice, and really doesn't start to dig its way out till about Labor Day. Excuse me, Memorial Day.
Yep.
And you'll notice the drops like right here, and then of course right here, and then right here. And those, they match 2019, and those are holiday drops. 4th of July, Labor Day, Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And then the orange line is this year. But more importantly, I'm going to zip and show you what New Hampshire looks like, because that's where we are. And we'll let that, you'll notice the pause isn't anywhere close to what the pause was nationally. Totally different. And you'll notice the showings, the dark blue line for last year were way ahead, which is, you know, indicative of where our market was. And of course, the orange line, we're ahead of where we were last year. No surprise there, because this time last year we were going into you know, this lockdown phase. So hopefully that helps. But the activity's still way up. So questions for me, Kim?
Yes.
Let's go.
Let's dive right in here. We have a question about using Zestimate and how should buyers and sellers properly use that tool?
Sure. Zestimates are nothing more than an automated valuation model. And the term Zestimate shows up on a platform called Zillow. And many of us are familiar with Zillow, and it is, its accuracy is suspect. And what I mean by that is this, it's kind of like your assessed value. They use the assessed valuation of your property. It is used in the Zestimate. And so how do you feel about your assessed value? And I guess the answer really depends on what the real market value is. You could look at your assessed value based on what your tax assessor says, and that might be good or bad, but you might not sell based on your assessed value, because you could be leaving a lot of money on the table. The best way to look at the value of your home, from my perspective, especially in this market, is sold properties have some value. They tell us what people have been willing to pay for it. But in a rapidly appreciating market, I think it's also important to know, what are you competing with if you were going to come on the market today? So it's sort of, let's play pretend, Kim. For instance, in the town you're in, you might say, well, for instance, last week at this time, the city of Manchester, there's 110,000 population. There were 17 houses on the market. 17. You could look at everything on the market in the city of Manchester, single family, in a weekend.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and where I'm going with this is that when you segment out your approximate price point, you know, most people will say, well, I'm going to be between $300,000 and $400,000. All right, so how many properties in Manchester fit into that category? And it might be 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, right? And so now you only have to figure, how do I compete against those 3, 4, 5, or 6 of them if I were going to come on the market today? And I will tell you, in most cases in an appreciating market, you're going to be asking more than the sold data told you.
Yes.
So it's really important. Zestimates are a way of historically looking at some of that information. And yes, there's some artificial intelligence that says, well, it's probably worth X percent more, but nothing beats the boots on the ground perspective that somebody like me can give you, that's out there, you know, working in the marketplace.
Okay. So there's a couple of questions that ask about the pros and cons of FSBO or for sale by owner, and what percentage of those are actually successful. So if you could just talk to that for a minute, what your perspective is.
Yeah, well, first of all, as a property owner, I guess I would not blame someone from at least considering this, because, you know, the commission rates are you know, when you factor in the average sale price, it's a significant amount of money. And you think, well, in this kind of market, couldn't I just sell it on my own? And the National Association of Realtors polls those that sold properties by themselves or have attempted, and 3 out of 4 of for sale by owners say they probably wouldn't or definitely wouldn't do it alone again. And part of the reason for that is pricing is one thing. So you can figure out, but to some degree of accuracy by the help of real estate professionals, what your property might be worth. Negotiating that successfully all the way to closing is another story altogether. I actually had a discussion with a client of mine about this very same thing. And price represents 2 lines on the standard purchase and sale contract. It's covered in two different spots on the contract. And those are the blanks that fill in the price. Well, most sellers can protect their price. I want to get 400,000 and I'm not taking a nickel less. But there's another 100 blanks on the purchase contract that don't have anything to do with price. And if someone is not careful in negotiating the sale on their own, or worse, if they're negotiating with a broker on the other end who's representing the buyer, it can get complicated, and they can potentially leave money on the table in either time or actual dollars. So it's one of those things that I think one of the ultimate things you owe to yourself is to interview a few real estate brokers, because not all are equal, right? And honestly, here's what I would say is that if they all were equal, then I wouldn't blame anybody from wanting to sort by price. If I can get Bounty for the same price that I can get, Viva paper towels, and now I'm just going to base my decision based on, quality, right? So that's the important part, making sure you've got a good professional, somebody that knows what they're doing.
Right, agreed. This person asks if the realtor's fee, or the percentage, is negotiable at all.
The answer is yes. So, and now let me qualify that. Realtors, if you can find somebody that can charge a flat fee just to put it into the multiple listing system, and there are other brokers that might charge more than that, and then there are other brokers that may charge more than them. Each broker may not be negotiable, but the fees are negotiable from broker to broker to broker, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So someone can say my fees aren't negotiable. That doesn't mean they're speaking for anybody other than themselves.
Okay. So how do you see prices trending between now and 2022? I know you don't have a crystal ball, maybe you do, but what do you think?
Well, this is really interesting because in 38 years of doing this, you'd think that I'm pretty good at it, and yet I'm not comfortable knowing. Still not. I think of this: a body in motion tends to stay in motion until acted upon by an opposite and equal outside force. So real estate prices are likely to continue unless we see some outside force. What might that be? This specter of inflation keeps coming up, and yet the Federal Reserve keeps saying, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. And yet there's still pressure on rates. We know, if we look back at the last month, fixed rates on mortgages today are more than they were a month ago. And so if they go up more, I think we could see a freeze in price increases for home sellers. And listen, global events have an impact on markets as well. We need look back no further than the beginning of last year. And if there were a different outcome, meaning if this pandemic were even more deadly, I think we would have seen more of a pause in this market and maybe an all-out free fall. So, it's hard to know. It really is hard to know what the market's going to look like. I know this much. I know that the inventory right now And the buyer activity right now, because I look at another trend, Kim, I look at the last 7 days in the populated counties I was talking about. I look at how many properties have gone under contract, how many properties have come on the market. And when I checked it earlier this morning, because I do a call with my agents at 8:30 in the morning, and I check this number every day, so I'm on top of it. And I look at the last week's worth of activity. The buyer traffic in Hillsborough, Rockingham, and Merrimack County, meaning properties gone under agreement, outpaced new listings 1.5 to 1. So that means there's still good traffic out there until we see some kind of equilibrium on a sustained basis, right? My point is, we haven't seen that. My numbers, I've been tracking it since the beginning of the pandemic last year, and we've been running 1.5 to 3 to 1 since the climb out, since we went from being non-essential. The governor considered real estate services non-essential, where we couldn't go out and show property. And that was a period of about 96 hours. There was about 4 or 5 days where the governor said everything's shut down, and then loosened that restriction. And since that time, it's been once the sellers felt safe and the buyers felt safe in terms of going out there, you saw what happened with the market. It just immediately rebounded here in New Hampshire.
Okay, here's an interesting question. What are some strategies for those interested in selling who may not be able to buy immediately due to low inventory?
Well, you're talking to somebody that did exactly that. So I'm walking the walk and talking the talk. And what I mean by that is I had most of the time people sell for significant reasons. They have a job transfer, they have a financial reversal, they need a bigger home, they need a smaller home, they need a warmer climate. You get my drift. And oftentimes it isn't just the financials that drive those decisions. It isn't like, oh my goodness, we're at record high numbers, let me sell now. However, that's even starting to contribute to people wanting to sell, is like, maybe I should cash in. I sold my home in August of 2019 without a property to buy. We knew where we kind of wanted to be, but we moved into temporary housing. And because we didn't have anything under contract, and so we moved into a temporary we moved into an apartment. For those that know Bedford, we moved into the apartments right up behind the Copper Door restaurant, and we were in there on a month-to-month basis. And then we found something to buy. We closed in October, the end of October, beginning of November of 2019, and started the renovations, and then forced our way in March of last year because we were fearful. Wait a minute, what if nobody can move us, right? We were thinking everything was going to get shut down. So in the middle of construction, we moved into the place we're now living in because we were fearful that we weren't going to be able to move if we didn't. So here's the point: is that if you don't know where you're going to go and you want to take advantage of the market, there are housing opportunities on a temporary basis that you can take advantage of. And one other point is, in this market, there are sellers that are not only carving themselves excellent offers, but they're carving themselves excellent offers with conditions, meaning I'll sell you my home, but I don't want to move till September. I don't want to move till October, meaning they're putting the time off. And because buyers are, in a position where they're anxious to get a property locked in, they're willing to give up time. They may want to close now to lock in the interest rate, but let you stay. And so you might be able to stay without moving for a period of time while you continue to look. And we have clients that have taken advantage of that.
Yeah, you never know until you ask, right?
Yeah.
Condition. Okay, so what percentage of sales are successful in the fall and winter as compared to the spring?
That is really a good question. And we actually, one of my agents did some research on this and found that there was as good a chance of selling, actually a little bit better, This was last year's numbers that we did prior to pandemic. So we were using 2019 numbers, but there's nothing to tell me that there's been much change. As a matter of fact, it's probably exacerbated it in the positive if you're a home seller. That there was as good a chance, if not a little bit better, of selling in the winter than in the spring. And the reason being there was less inventory. You weren't competing. There's so many people that say, well, I'm going to get it on the market in the spring. And then there was this onslaught of inventory. There's a chart, one of the charts that I showed before actually shows this increase in inventory come about May, where people start saying, well, I'm going to get my house on the market in the spring. Seasonality is disappearing a little bit, and last year kind of proved it to home sellers and home buyers because there really was no spring market. It kind of turned into spring for the whole year.
So there's a couple of different questions that are addressing the most important things to do in terms of staging your home or preparing it for sale. And I know you touched upon that briefly in the last slide, but is there anything else in terms of staging, maybe bringing in a staging company, or, what are your thoughts on those actions?
So oftentimes people think about staging as a major potential expense because they're going to have to bring in furniture and they're going to have to do all kinds of work. The best thing you can do, from my perspective, is to bring your real estate professional in early before you do all kinds of repairs to your house or what you perceive as staging ideas. HGTV is entertaining, but before you start sledgehammering walls and doing all that kind of thing, stop. Because oftentimes there are things that if we get called in a little too late, we can't counsel somebody, God, I wish you hadn't spent the money here. It's too late. And so there are things, for instance, I'll give you just one example. I had a client, they called me in to look at the house and they said, we're going to have the entire driveway repaved. And I counseled them out of it. It wasn't so bad. Now, there are some driveways that need repaving, trust me, but it wasn't so bad. And I'm glad I got called in beforehand because, you're talking about a $10,000, $15,000 job that wouldn't necessarily equate to $10,000 or $15,000 extra in the house. So oftentimes it's best to bring in the real estate professional early. And some staging can be some decluttering, but I am not in favor of this, take every photograph off the wall, take everything down, depersonalize it. If you walk into model homes for builders, one of the things they have up on the walls are photographs of fake families. Why? Because they want people to get a sense of what it might look like if someone really lived there. And so you want your home to be clean. You want it to be presentable. And yes, in some cases decluttered, but it does not have to be devoid of personality. And so, staging's come a long way, and there are some staging professionals that overdo it. And we have stagers that we use that, can give some homeowners just a checklist, do the following things and you'll be good. And then there are others that say, well, we need to bring in a chair here, or take a love seat out there. So there are some things that are combination. It's not as onerous as you might think, especially if you can kind of have somebody guide you through what it might look like.
Okay. So I know you briefly touched upon the outlook for condo sales and vacation type units. But is that significantly different from urban residential, or they all kind of follow the same curve?
So last year we saw an anomaly that I think follows good economic times, but last year in particular, we noticed that this huge uptick in prices in the Lakes region and vacation portions of the state. So the Seacoast, Lakes region, ski areas, huge increases in sales and prices. And the reason being is because people in urban locations outside, first of all, let's classify what urban might mean. Most of New Hampshire is not tremendously urban. Not when you compare, the city of Boston or, large metropolitan areas like New York City and of course, areas like that. But we saw a huge change. For instance, I can't think of the corporation that did the study, but they studied the top 5 states that were purchasing in New Hampshire. And so number 1, no surprise, was the state of New Hampshire. People that were buying in New Hampshire actually lived in New Hampshire. In other words, they were buying something big or something smaller, you get my drift. They were staying where they lived already. Number 2, again, no surprise, Massachusetts. And so we've seen that for years, that after New Hampshire, Massachusetts, a lot of people moving from Massachusetts to get to New Hampshire. 3 and 4 are as follows. 3 was Maine, 4 was Connecticut, and 5 was New York. So Vermont was all kind of by itself. They weren't in the top 5. People that are in Vermont, staying in Vermont. But you get my point is that we saw a lot of people coming from the urban, what I'm going to call urban areas that might have experienced more of a lockdown, saying, you know what, I want to get a second home that I can make my first home if I have to. And so we saw a lot of that going on last year.
And so that probably contributes to the inventory shortage also, right?
No doubt. And, and also, it's interesting because we also saw people that were looking at houses that just had land. I want to move somewhere where I can get 5 or 6 acres of land. And by the way, if somebody wants something with some land, you don't have to venture too far out of the city of Manchester to get that. Right? You really don't. You can be 15 minutes out of the city of Manchester and be on, a significant amount of acreage.
Okay, so let's see. Here's a good question. There was one that was the best questions to ask when interviewing a realtor. So what do you think the top questions are that people should ask?
How do you plan on marketing my home? If you were going to sell my home, what would you recommend I ask for a price and why? Track record would be something I would look at. I would also ask this question. What are you, how do I want to phrase this? What are your objectives when you sell a property for a client? What are your primary objectives? You notice I didn't put commission rate in there, but that would be one I would ask. And it wouldn't be my top choice, but it would be a question if I were a seller, I'd want to know. And in part because as I spend some time with people, I'd like to know, what differentiates one from another. It doesn't mean I'd go for the one that's less money, but if they're equal, I might. The most important thing you can do, in my opinion, when hiring somebody is if you're spending time in the interview process with folks, get a sense of, ask yourself this question, not ask them, but ask yourself this: can I work with this person? Do they communicate with me? I'll give you an example. Years ago, I asked for a primary care physician. My primary care physician was retiring and I needed another primary care physician. So I asked around and I got a really phenomenal recommendation from a family member. And my first 2 visits with this primary care physician, I had nothing, I could not communicate. Or more importantly, they couldn't communicate with me. And it was like, we were like this. And it was to the point of awkward. And I needed to make a change, not because I didn't think that the PCP knew what they were doing. They did. It's just something as important as my health. I wanted to be able to have a real live conversation. And while this isn't your physical health, it's your financial health when you're interviewing a realtor. So I would ask yourself that question. Can I work with them? Do I like them?
Right. Yeah.
Can I trust them? You know?
So speaking of financials, there's a couple of questions here. So it says, besides eliminating the risk of denied financing, what are the other ramifications of a cash offer?
Well, so it depends on the contingencies that are in the contract besides the, they're going to remove financing, but there may be other conditions in there. For instance, there are some standard conditions, a title search. There may be a home inspection that might be, that the buyer may want. And so if there's a home inspection, there is a potential opportunity to open up negotiations all over again if there's some things found in the inspection. We have had, for instance, we recently had a situation that came to my attention. It was not one of my sales, but it came to my attention of a cash offer that fell apart at the closing because the buyer had significant, was able to proof of funds. They showed statements that showed they had well in advance the amount of money to purchase the house. But at the closing, when they needed to convert the money from the accounts that they had the money in with their financial advisor into cash, they needed 72 additional hours. And the financial advisor and accountant and their accountants to the buyer said, if you convert these funds and buy this house, you are going to have a taxable event that is going to cost you X amount of dollars. And that the buyer hadn't considered. And the buyer had a $10,000 cash deposit and forfeited the deposit to the seller and walked away from the sale. So not all cash offers are the same, obviously. So it really comes down to, from my perspective, what are the other conditions in the offer, if any? There may be some that say no conditions, no home inspection, no financing. We'll close when you want us to. Well, we've had one buyer just in a contract a couple of weeks ago say, I'll give you a $100,000 cash deposit right now. We'll give it directly to the client. That is, that's unheard of in the marketplace. Even I hadn't seen that in 38 years. So
that person means business.
Yeah. And they weren't, by the way, they weren't the highest offer.
No.
The one that the client took because it was probably the most guaranteed, right?
Sure. Yeah. It sounds like.
And by the way, the highest offer wasn't much different. It was a little higher, but not significantly.
Just it looked differently in format.
Yeah, and there is a process that we go through, depending when there are multiple offers. You've got to kind of have a system to look at each one on the surface and figure out how do you score them, right?
Yeah. That sounds like a whole different can of worms. It's very complex at times because I guess probably the buyer has their own idea of how things should work too. If they want to receive letters from the seller. So there is a question about Riverwoods, which I'm happy to answer. And the question is, do the prices at Riverwoods follow changes in the market? And the answer to that is that they don't. There is a minimal 1 to 3% increase annually to our entrance fees and service fees, but it certainly is not a real estate product. We are an insurance product. So that's the short answer to that. And if you'd like more information, please reach out. So let's see, there's still about 10 questions left. Virtual staging. We kind of talked about staging a little bit, but anything to add in terms of virtual, or are we kind of moving past that now?
Well, we hire a virtual stager. You know, people, the best example I can give you is someone that said, what is a virtual stager? And I said, well, to give you an idea, some people used to call it Photoshop. It's not, it's much more than that. It's adding furniture where furniture didn't exist. It's taking things out. It might be bluing up the sky or greening up the grass. There are things to do to make the picture more appealing. Now, what is important is that you don't, for instance, we draw the line on, you know, I'll give you an example. We had a client that once said, well, can't you virtually stage the power lines out of the photograph? And, you know, to me, I think that's a little bit troubling, because it's sort of, you're taking far more than license, like making the grass look a little greener or the sky look a little bluer. It might be a little deception. And it's a gray area, because some clients might say, well, when they get there, aren't they going to see the power lines? But we want to keep the client and the customer being the buyer, engaged enough that they don't feel mad the moment they drive up, because that isn't going to bring us an offer. So
yeah, sounds like a fine line for sure.
Yeah. And we have virtual stagers that we use, and they're very effective, and we pick up the cost of the virtual stager, so it's part of our marketing.
That's good to know. With house prices increasing, is there a problem with them appraising okay by the banks for mortgage purposes? Are you seeing a variance?
The answer is yes and no. And what I mean by that is keep in mind, an appraiser is one person's opinion of value, and because they represent the bank, it can be problematic. Most appraisers out there are aware of what's going on in the market, and it's a rapidly appreciating market. You know, they're looking to certify what I'm going to call reasonable value. It's called CRV, a certification of reasonable value. And so they're not looking to hit the nail on the head and you know, be completely 100%, you know, say right down to the nickel, saying here's exactly what it's worth. But if they believe it's overvalued, they have a duty to tell the bank, we can't certify this. It's happening in small percentages. It's not anything that we haven't dealt with in just about every market I've ever been in. It's not anything that's freezing the marketplace.
So there's still a few more questions. Do you have a few more minutes, Bill?
Sure.
Okay. The kitchen was updated 38 years ago, except for new appliances. Should I update those before putting it on the market, or let the buyers do it to their taste?
It really depends on the appliances, and it depends on how the kitchen looks in general. Hard to know. So it really depends. You know, if the appliances are 38 years old, they may need to be updated, but you know, it kind of depends. And there are ways to get a really decent look for not a lot of money. And so it comes down to right now, by the way, if there's ever been a market where you've had to stage a little less and spend a little less, my goodness, now is the market.
Yes.
You know? And so, you know, it's an opportunistic, when I say opportunistic, it's opportunistic for a reason. If you'd rather do a little less, now is not a bad time to consider it. that is not a blanket statement. It's just, you know, because I don't want to, there's nothing like the warm taste of my own words.
But I could see that, some people, you make that investment, people come in and say, oh, or they see the value in having the opportunity to make things look the way that they want, rather than moving it just being, renovated or refurbished. So it depends on the buyer, right?
Well, and then, also there are some times where you can get one of the things that we might do is get an appliance package estimate, so that we can get an idea of what exactly buying, let's say it was a KitchenAid, and you get all of the appliances replaced for X amount of dollars. So you have a hard and fast number. And one of the reasons is that way, if a buyer says, oh my God, I'm going to need to spend $10,000 on appliances, you could say, well, actually, no, we just got, here's an estimate that we took the liberty of getting to get all of the appliances through Barron's in the KitchenAid family for the following. And so that might be one workaround or a potential workaround.
Okay. So would that be part of the strategy for maximizing your sales price right now, is just kind of putting together proactive pieces of what people might be looking for rather than just going ahead and doing it all yourself?
Yeah, potentially. And part of the reason is that, I use this example. Paint costs $50 in the can and, $1,000 on the wall. And what I mean by that is that people, might very well be able to paint the house, paint the rooms themselves, but they say, this is going to cost me $10,000 to repaint the rooms. Well, probably not, but buyers tend to overestimate what they're looking at because they just don't have a clear understanding. So it's good to take that off the table by having some estimates, if in fact you're not going to do any of the work.
So speaking of estimates, is it a good idea to have more than one appraisal completed on a home?
Well, so the answer is appraisals and market analysis or equity analysis are different. Meaning a real estate professional can do a comparative market analysis of what's going on in the marketplace and include that in their services, and they charge nothing for it other than the opportunity to talk to you about what it might look like if you decide to hire them to sell a house. Going out and hiring an appraiser to certify the value might cost you $500 to $1,000 per appraisal. So I would recommend against doing it that way. And rather than interviewing a few realtors, you're going to need to anyway, possibly, unless you have a family friend or a past realtor that you've worked with before that you say, there's no question as to who I'm going to use. I'm going to use the following. Then, just give get a sense of what you're competing with in the marketplace. Look at not only sold, but what's on the market today. And you'll get a pretty good understanding. And yes, you can look at your estimate and still should, and you can look at your assessed value and still should. There are other automated valuation models as well. It's not harmful. It's just more data. It's kind of like taking a picture outside today and saying, this is the way it looks every day in March. Well, not really, but it's the way it looks today. And that's what, a market analysis will tell you. It's how things look right now.
So interestingly enough, you mentioned, having a friend or family who's a realtor, but do you have any advice for people who may be moving down that path, mixing, family with business?
Yeah, well, so I go back to the primary care physician question, right? Do you feel comfortable? Because if you don't feel comfortable and the person's a family member, then there's a primary driver to that, and that's I don't feel comfortable. Yeah. If you feel totally comfortable and the person's a family member, you see my point? Is it you're taking it off the table? If you're questioning it, then there may be a comfort issue. I always say to people, look, can you communicate with the person, and do you trust the person? And those are two primary drivers for me. You know, and yes, competency also, because you can find a likable, trustable person, but if they're not competent, you know, that's not good either.
Right, yeah.
Got to be the trilogy there, you know?
So current market question, what percentage of houses are being sold above asking price?
That's a good question. So we have gone 6 straight months in the state of New Hampshire at over 100%. It's like 100.8%. And it's been that way since I believe August or September. So list price to sale price ratio.
Okay. What is, this person's asking if you should absolutely get the inspection done before putting your house for sale.
No. And the reason being is there are a couple things. Number one, if you start finding all kinds of things that you're going to have to replace, you may have to disclose all those items. If you didn't know about it ahead of time, now you do know. And I'm not saying hiding things from people, Kim, okay? That's not what I'm saying, is because you may not even know.
Right.
But the inspection now uncovers these items. One of the things we're finding with buyers right now is a willingness to waive inspections. So, you know, doing an inspection might be cost to either spending the money or having to disclose items that need to be repaired. So I'm not a fan of doing home inspections. If something needs to be done and you know it needs to be done, fix it, right?
Right.
Or disclose it.
Right.
You don't need an additional inspection to tell you what you already know.
Fair enough. Okay, so new builds or existing homes in this current market, advantages or disadvantages of either choice. It's probably loaded.
It is a loaded question. And so, there's so many ups and downs in all of this. And you're talking to somebody that's lived in 5 brand new houses. So I've moved.
I have one too.
Yeah. So you might be able to corroborate what I'm about to say. Well, when building a new house, it is the starting point. I can see it in your face, Kim. I play poker with you because you're not a good bluffer. And what I mean by that is there's always more money to spend on a new house. You think, well, I'm going to buy a new house. I'm not going to have to put any money into the house. It's brand new. And yet there's landscaping that needs to be done. There's some base things that the builder will include, but then there's always things that need to be done over and above. For instance, you buy a brand new house, the first thing you need to do is figure out, what am I going to do for window treatments? What am I going to do for landscaping? What am I going to do? You see, my point is that if you're prepared for it and you know that your base price is just the starting point, that's one thing. The upside is you're buying something brand new, so the systems in the house are under warranty, and you know, you don't have a lot of that hanging over your head, but you do have work to do in the house. And then if you're building from the ground up, you've got all kinds of additional choices that come your way. Oh, do we add a bay window instead of a picture window? Do we add another fireplace in this room? Do we add there are all kinds of things to do. Do we have a freestanding tub? Do we have a tile surround? It just goes on and on and on. Flooring decisions. And I will say this, having built, as I said, 5 times, you never opt for, it's very hard to opt for the base offering. It's always like, oh, if this looks good, this looks better. And you know, it's only $1,000 more. It's only $5,000 more, and before you know it, you've added $50,000 to the price.
Yeah,
so
I would say the same concept also applies to planning events like weddings. It's easy to just add on and spiral, right?
Amen.
Yeah. Okay, just a couple more questions here. If no one has a lower price than the seller, what is the rule of thumb percentage you should ask above to allow reasonable room for negotiation on the price?
If no one has a lower price than the seller, meaning, I'm guessing what the question was there, if you're asking, what everybody else has sold their property for, what's a reasonable amount to ask over that? I think it really depends on your competition. And if the competition is all the same, meaning, keep in mind, this is more art than science. And so this is a general answer, whereas your property may be very, very specific to the marketplace. But I will give you a general answer, and that is, let's pretend that the properties are all virtually the same and you're competing against everybody's asking $400,000. How much more should you ask? Well, it depends. If yours is exactly the same as the others, how will yours perform versus theirs if they're active on the market competing against you? You may help them sell their house by asking more. Their price stands out better. So you may be better off asking the same price and figuring out, keep in mind, there's this concept in real estate, especially residential real estate, called homogeneity, which means everything is unique unto itself. Meaning you and I could have the same house, Kim, but if you're on the west side of the street and I'm on the east side of the street, your morning sun is different than my morning sun in terms of the way it comes into the house. You see my point? There's always going to be something that might differentiate in the eyes of the buyer. So ultimately, is that worth 10,000 more? I don't know. My personal feeling is that in this market, what we're seeing is, because prices are being driven by multiple offers, the market has always been what somebody's willing to pay for it. It's just that in this market, asking price is the starting price with the potential of going over. In previous markets, asking price was the starting price with the potential of going under. Big difference now.
Okay, one last question. Asking about the Case-Shiller Home Price Index. Do you use this index and how do you use it?
Yeah, so Case-Shiller, the interesting thing about it is it's, for me, it's valuable because it gives me some ideas of what's going on in major metropolitan areas. I'm more boots on the ground when it comes down to what's going on in the towns and the cities I'm working in. And so it gives me, I pay for a subscription service that gives me data not only from Case-Shiller, but multiple sources every single month. And so I'm looking at all kinds of data, not only from the National Association of Realtors, but from the financial houses as well as what's going on in the markets. And Case-Shiller has been sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Has been a bellwether in terms of giving us an idea of what the major metropolitan areas are telling us. It has some value. All data has value. It's, what does it mean to you in the town you're in is really the better question.
Great. I had never heard of that tool before, so I learned a lot of new things today. Thank you, Bill. So that's it for questions. So thank you for your time today, everyone. You can register for our next event coming up on April 14th on any of the Riverwoods group websites. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks,
Take care, everybody. Thanks for being here.